What's up, Squadron? Aviation has given me a ton of amazing experiences.
Good job there. Nice rock, high wing.
But more importantly, it's introduced me to a whole new family of friends.
Like, dude, you're killing it. You're having a great day.
So just never give up.
Airport, and then, oh, by the way, I got carb ice while I was flying through, so the engine started running rough. And I had to
Join us tonight as we're cleared direct for some hangar flying. I am Bryon Bowman, and this is SuperAero Live.
That's a lot. I mean, a lot of cookies. What's up, Av Geeks? It's Wednesday, which can only mean one thing, that I am blowing my mic out. What is happening? That's so loud. Why is it so loud? That's not professional. I should have checked that before the show. I was too excited about tonight's guest. What's up, Av Geeks? It's Wednesday, which can only mean one thing. It's time for another episode of SuperAero Live. Whoa. How are you all doing? I'm having a week. Dudes, I'm having a week, dudes and dudettes, but we're making it, and getting excited. Air Venture's coming up soon in, like, I don't know, a month or something like that. That's really exciting, and we have a lot of fun calls. And then also, if you're looking for something to do this weekend, I will not be there, but SoCal Stole over into Tejeiro is happening this weekend. Not this weekend, next weekend. What is happening with my brain? Not this weekend, next weekend, Tejeiro, SoCal Stole. Check that out. Who's in the chat? I gotta quit while I'm ahead here. Zach Sherman's here. Was he first? I think he was first. Red Baron Modeling, good to see you. Marty's here. Hanger Tales is here. Waukesha Pilot. Good to see you guys. Greg Hughes is here. The legendary Greg Hughes, who actually will thank him now for introducing me to tonight's guest. Thank you, Greg. Gary Smith is here. Canyon K. Tim Everett is here. Freedom Fixer Flying. Gang is all filing in for the show. I think it's weird. Started a little more on time tonight, and you guys maybe don't know what to do with that. I didn't see anything complaining about that. And frankly, those of you who have the SuperAero Live bingo card that play along at home and play bingo every week, I'm sorry I took that one away from you. Started on time, basically. I don't know, plus or minus. Definitely excited for tonight's guest. I want to jump right into it because I think tonight we're going to learn a lot, and I'm excited to learn a lot. I want to introduce him and check it out. Look who's here. It's Nico.
What's up? Good to be here, Ryan.
Dude, it is so cool to have you on the show. I want to load up just right away, in case people don't know. I'm going to load up you send me some videos. I'll play them throughout the stream. But this is the kind of stuff that you do with an FPV drone, and it's insane. Like, such beautiful stuff. And you're flying a drone with full-scale aircraft. That's, I think, where a lot of us maybe have seen your stuff and didn't realize it was yours. So I'm just excited, one, as an airplane guy, but two, as a film producer guy, to see someone making such exciting content. So that's why you're here tonight. We're going to talk FPV drones and cinema and airplanes and all that stuff. So just wanted to, did I do a good job introducing you? Was that a good
That was
summary?
great. That was a fantastic job. Yeah, I think the video certainly helps because I'm just honored to be here because I'm not a real pilot. I'm just a drone pilot, but it's great to be a part of the show and hopefully share some knowledge about FPV drones because I think that as we move forward, you're going to start seeing a lot of those in the sky and a lot of those closer to planes capturing cool footage. So I think that it's good to be here for sure.
Dude, it's super exciting. It's exciting to see. We were talking a little bit before the show, I've goofed around. I've got a Mavic Pro somewhere down in this mess that I use on film sets every once in a while for landscapey, orbiting a building or something. Not a lot of proximity flying, and watching that side of it over the last, I don't know, whenever the Phantoms first came out, progress. And now we're seeing FPV becoming something that's more and more accessible. Before the show, you and I were talking about like DJI's got the FPV drone, all that stuff. Just really exciting. I want to take a step back though, before I nerd out too hard, and just talk a little bit about how did you get started? Like how did you find FPV?
It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to shorten it and keep it exciting. But basically, I've always been a really big aviation nerd, and since I was little, I always wanted to be a pilot. I was even in Air Patrol for I think a year or two because I was like, oh, I'm gonna go into the Air Force, and this is gonna be super cool. So that was exciting. But the thing that was missing for me when I was in Air Patrol was I really liked the creative side. So I was always a filmmaker. So those are my two passions, my two main passions of life was airplanes and aviation on one side and then filmmaking on the other. So my whole life I was kind of like going along this path of what could I do that combines those two in a good way. And when I was in college, I decided to find the cheapest way to fly, which was paragliding. So I saved up a bunch of money. I did some door-to-door sales jobs, and I saved up and I bought myself my first paragliding wing, and I paid for training, and I got my paragliding license, and then I got super obsessed with that, and I would fly all over the west of the country just driving around in my little Honda Accord with my wing in the back and a tent and just camp around in various places and fly with my friends, and I had a great time doing that. But I noticed this trend where I would always be flying with my camera, and at the time I had a very bad Chinese ripoff of a GoPro that was like super cheap. I regret having that. I wish I got just like a proper GoPro from the get-go. But I would fly really close to my friends on their paragliders, just as close as I could get safely to where I can get really beautiful shots of them. And after that, I jumped into speed flying, which is, if you're not familiar, speed flying is very similar to paragliding, but the wing is about a third of the size. So you go much faster. And so you're able to launch on top of these mountains and then skim across the ground really quickly, 40 miles an hour, just doing barrel rolls and stuff like that. So that was a blast. And then after that, I got a job in North Carolina, and I was really kind of depressed for a little bit because there's no mountains there, right? So you can't really paraglide. So I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? This is such a big part of me. So I got into skydiving at that point. And I was like, well, what's next? Probably a pilot's license. But I got into a ski accident, and it was really silly. I just hit a patch of ice when I was skiing, and I messed up my shoulder. So I couldn't skydive, I couldn't speed fly, and I couldn't paraglide for a little bit of time while my shoulder was healing. And I just didn't know what to do with myself because that was my identity, and I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. So it was super important to me to keep going. And at that point, I knew that one of my friends, my good friends, Carter, he was doing this whole FPV drone thing. And I'm like, what is that? Let's see what this is. And so I told him, listen, I'll pay you if you can build me an FPV drone so I can keep flying with my friends, but I'll just fly with them virtually. So I'll be able to get the same exact shots that I've been getting of them with the GoPro on my helmet while I'm chasing them on a speedwing. But this time it's going to be on a drone. And so that was kind of what got me into it. But the first time, that first flight that I had with that FPV drone, I was completely blown away. And I thought that, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So at that point, I kind of stopped paragliding, speed flying, and skydiving completely because I was just 100% focused on FPV drones and what you can capture with them. Because at that point, I couldn't just chase paragliders and speed wings. I could also chase airplanes and anything that I want. So I kind of got super into it and really obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions. Also, I'm just getting like highly distracted by this awesome footage I'm showing while you're chatting there. Like, so do you get, maybe this is a little bit of a sidebar question, but you mentioned the adrenaline junkie thing. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, like we've had a number of powered paramotor pilots on. They've talked about like speed wings. They talk about like they all buy it to kite, just to kite. Mm-hmm. They kite speed wings in high wind conditions so they can still practice kiting even if they can't fly and stuff. How does the adrenaline translate for you with the FPV stuff? Like, do you get the same adrenaline jolt from it? I've always been curious about that.
That's a really good question. I guess the best way to explain it is when you're flying on a speedwing and when you're skydiving, the responsibility for your safety is really kind of on you. So if something bad happens, it's just going to happen to yourself. And sure. I'm okay with that. I can live with that. If I mess up and I do something stupid, then it's on me and I pay for it. But with FPV drones, especially if you're starting to do more of the higher risk flying, where you're flying next to a helicopter, you're flying next to planes, the responsibility lies on you to keep the other person safe. So for me, I take that very, very seriously. So to a certain degree, the adrenaline rush is a little bit more stressful, I would say, than if you're just jumping out of a plane yourself, because you have this responsibility to make sure that whoever you're filming is safe. And so I think it's pretty comparable, but I think with the FPV drones, especially some of the things that I've been lucky to film, it's been a lot more of a, like, it's really intense sometimes, and you need to be able to handle that pressure, I would say. So I think that's part of the reason what attracts me to it so much, is because maybe just skydiving and paragliding doesn't excite me anymore, because it seems like it's the same thing over and over again, right? So yeah, you jump out of a plane, that's cool. You have your buddies with you, or you fly off of this ridge and you're able to do a cross-country flight for 20 miles. That's great, but you're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's going to be a pretty similar flight. But with an FPV drone, every kind of shoot that we do, the conditions are variable. Everything's completely different. The drones you can be using switch from shoot to shoot. So there's just so much newness, so much more things that you can experience in life. So I guess that's one way to answer that.
No, that makes sense. And it's funny. I'm show my age a little bit here, but a long time ago, when I was just a young production assistant in the film production community, we used to do jobs with a company called Flying Cam. And so this is like pre-quadcopter, pre-drone anything. And we were flying 35 millimeter, motion picture film in a gimbal the size of your head on like an 8-foot diameter rotor, like remote control helicopter. It's like
Oh wow!
It's like, and it was what you said. What brought me back to that was you were talking about the responsibility and the intensity of that. And we would go shoot tourism commercials, and the pilots of those were all, like remote control helicopter, like champions for stunt flying or whatever. They'd like go recruit them to come, do that for a year or two around the world. And
wow.
When I asked the pilot about that, when we were on set, like chasing like speedboats and stuff, I was like, hey, like, what do you like more? Do you like this, or do you like the stunt flying more? And he's like, with the stunt flying, there are no repercussions to an error. Like, I just, like, flop the helicopter around, and if it crashes on the ground, it's just money. He's like, there are, like, real repercussions. Like, I have to, like, really think. And so I think he got the same thing out of it. Long story short, the same thing out of it that you're getting out of it. Like, that intensity, the responsibility, the, like, stakes are higher than just, like... goofing around on I mean, I don't know. The stakes are high when you're paragliding because it's your body. But
well, yeah, but
I get what you're saying.
I'm not doing this because the stakes are high. I'm doing this because I think that I'm very passionate about creating stuff, and this is a good way to kind of harness my personality in the sense that I do like stuff that's a little bit more intense, in a way that I can showcase, let's say an aircraft, or showcase something in a way that nobody's ever seen before. And hopefully at the end of the day, grow aviation, because I think that it's such a beautiful thing. I mean, aviation is amazing. And so my mission is to just try to share that with people as best as I can.
So you have the injury that sidelines you from the other stuff. You get into FPV, you're flying, and I think people, if they go to your Instagram, they can see some of that work with the paragliders, right? Like there's some stuff like kind of like deeper in
Some
there.
really old stuff. Yep.
But like when did you transition to the stuff like we're seeing right now with the full scale aircraft? How did that come about?
I think that was about, what was that, maybe 6 months in? I don't quite remember. But the way that I started, and I guess a good way to train for chasing aircraft, I guess this could segment into that as well, is I would fly with my buddy Carter. So Carter, when I started out, he was the one who built my first FPV drone, and he kind of taught me a lot about just to get started with FPV, the technical side of things, everything. And so we would fly a lot together, and I would chase him around in the sky. And what I noticed was chasing an FPV drone is really difficult because these drones are very highly maneuverable, and you're flying them fully manual. So this isn't like a Mavic. If you let go of the controls, it's not going to hover in place. It's going to go hit a cliff, or it's going to fly off into nothing. So when you're chasing another FPV drone pilot, you need to be, that teaches you, since they're so maneuverable, that teaches you these fine motor skills to where once you start chasing objects that are much larger in size, it becomes way easier because you know exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to behave, especially if you're an aviation nerd and you kind of know the physics behind it and what to expect, especially when you're flying around a helicopter. There's certain things that you have to keep in mind as opposed to a plane. There's certain areas that you want to avoid at all costs and just kind of keep away from. But I think that when I always wanted to chase planes. Like since I started flying FPV drones, I'm like, okay, this could be used for chasing planes because I think we have the technology here that's capable of achieving those speeds. And so I had a friend of mine, his name was Shaquille, and we filmed this RC jet video, and he had an RC turbine, which is crazy, like the stuff he does in flying with those RC turbines that are crazy expensive, and one wrong move and you crash it and you lose a crazy amount of money. But we did a video with Carter where we flew around that jet, and that went really well. And then he connected me with his friend Bruce Graham, who has that yellow carbon cup that you were showing earlier.
Sure. And
he was the one who was trustful of us. So the very first flight that I ever chased to a full-size aircraft was Bruce's carbon cub. And so we filmed that snow video. That was the very first time that we chased a plane. The one where he's flying around in the snow. I think I sent that over to you.
This one.
Yeah. So that was the very first video. And back then I was still flying a pretty basic FPV drone setup that was really slow. So I was topping out at like 80 miles an hour. I was really struggling to just keep up with this plane, even though it is a carbon cub and it can fly pretty dang slow when it wants to. But that was kind of the initial step. And after that, I was like, wow, this could really go somewhere. And so I started exploring other options on how can you get these drones to go faster? How can you get them to fly longer? Because the main limitation is when you're keeping up with a plane of that size is you can't fly for very long. So I have to bring like 10, 20 batteries so I can get the shots that I need to. Because, it's particular for this shoot because it was out in the cold and batteries don't do well in the cold. So I was flying 30 seconds behind this plane, and then as soon as those 30, 40 seconds are up, I'd come back to land, swap batteries, and get back up. Now it's gotten a lot easier because I can push higher speeds and I have better endurance. But it was interesting just getting started.
There's some questions in the chat that I want to pop up. First of all, people are mostly blown away the way I was when I first saw the stuff. And actually, I think the other thing that happened is my fellow National Stole buddy, Kelly, was like, we were at Sun and Fun and we were getting ready for like the night air show. And he was like, just held his phone up and he's like, look at this. Like he was so pumped. Like he was looking at I think you did the stuff with the yak, the twin yak or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he's like, look at that. He was like so excited. I was like, dude, there's like an air show happening. He's like, no, like, look at my phone. Like he was so excited about it.
Kelly's awesome.
So anyway, what I wanted to see, I lost it now because I got it. I was telling that silly story. Oh, okay. So a couple things. You mentioned battery capacities are changing and getting better. You mentioned some of the speeds in the beginning when you're first starting. Canyon K is wondering about range. Like, what's the range that you can... Because you're chasing a full-size aircraft, you're gobbling up range as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is, I mean, since the plane is going so fast, you just go right past you and you just keep going and going. And I've had a few situations where I was so into getting the shot. I'm like, oh, this is such a good shot. This is such a good shot. I almost got it. This is just getting better and better. And then I look at my pattern and I'm like, oh no, I'm not sure if I'm going to make it back. And so I peel off the plane and I start flying back and I land out somewhere, almost made it back, but not quite. So there's definitely stuff like that happens. But to answer that question, under ideal conditions, and we're talking about somewhere up in the mountains where there isn't any city Wi-Fi that's entering the mix, I could fly. I've flown 3.5 miles out. But when you're talking about these kind of speeds, you have to be much closer. Otherwise, you're going to fly 3 miles out and then lose battery and have a hard landing somewhere. You don't want that. So typically for these shoots, I ask the pilot to stay within a mile of me. And that kind of depends on what we're doing as well. So if you pull up the footage with Matt, what I would have him do with his Bonanza was I would ask him to do figure eights above our location. And that would help out a ton because he would, so for this one, I would ask him to fly alongside that ridge and then take a right turn and then sort of do figure eights above my position. And I was way back there. I was flying pretty far out for this one. If you look to the left here, I'm right there under the left of the ridge for that one. But yeah, range is definitely one of those things you got to keep in mind, especially if you're flying near a city, because then you have to be super careful with reception.
Trying to find you in that.
I'm like a little tiny dot.
That's so cool. So, other questions coming in. These are Hanger Tales is wondering about the drones you're flying are single operator. Is that accurate?
Yes. So I guess I try to fly with the spotter as much as I can because that is, with a plane, that's a must actually. So, because you need to have somebody with their eyes on the aircraft and the drone and make sure they can tell me where they are and all of that. So, but as far as the operator, yes, it is single operator. So when you see me turning left and right, I'm using the control sticks of the drone to position the camera while I'm flying it. And that's why oftentimes you'll see FPV drones, which is kind of classic. You see that tilted horizon because I'm flying kind of sideways and there isn't a gimbal, at least on that drone, that can correct it. So whenever I fly tilted sideways, that's sort of what happens.
And I think that's a twofold thing, like aesthetically, right? Like sometimes you get kind of like the side slip angled horizon thing, but also it's the only thing that I'm always trying to educate fellow producers about this. Like they're always like, I want it to look like it's a bird flying. I'm like, well, you can't do that with a Mavic. I mean, you sort of can if you want, but if you want like a swooping action or like diving or whatever, like that's the other side of it as well. I assume. Let's see. Carter Films is here. He says, "What up?" Nico Films is the GOAT.
Carter, my dude.
Brian Garrett's wondering about the helicopter video, like how well, and actually it's for fixed wing too. Curious about this, like how well did the drones handle wake turbulence, prop wash, things like that?
That's a great question. They actually handle it quite well. And before I really started getting into flying with helicopters, so I got lucky with Eli the heli guy and Rusty Robinson. They were super. I just reached out to Eli and I'm like, hey, this crazy idea. You're probably going to say no, but I want to do this. Can I fly around your helicopter? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. But we approached it from a very careful perspective is because we wanted to know how close I could get to it and what it would do to the drone because we didn't want the drone to freak out. So how we tested it is we just put the helicopter in a hover maybe 200 feet above the ground. And I would start off really far away, just kind of inch my way closer to the ground, closer to the helicopter, and see what happens when I fly directly underneath the blades. And you can definitely see the vibration quite a bit in the footage, but it doesn't impact the controls of the drone. It's totally fine. The motors don't overheat or anything like that. It just kind of ruins the footage with the shakiness. But the good thing is with these cameras, since they have a gyro built in, right? So most of these shots I filmed with a GoPro. FPV pilots tend to use this stabilization program called RealSteady to stabilize the footage in post. So if I were to share the raw footage, you would say, oh, this is terrible because there's so much shakiness, especially fly into some of this wake of the turbulence. And there's 3 points with the airplane. There's the right behind the tail, you get hit with a blast from the motor. Then there's the 2 wingtips. I found if you get really close to wingtips, they're going to try to flip you over on the side, but they never can because, I mean, if it was a jumbo jet, definitely will. But since most of the planes that I fly with are fairly small, I've never had it tip me over to the side. I can just feel it trying to. But with helicopters, I would say it's a lot more predictable in the sense that you know exactly where the airflow is going. And you got to just watch out for when a helicopter's coming in pretty close to land. Let's say it's like 20 feet above the ground. It creates this sort of like a gust front of air. So oftentimes there's a video that you could actually see me approaching the helicopter really low. And then as soon as you see me hit that flow of air, it's kind of like it bounces me up a little bit and then I compensate for it and I get back down. So it's something that the more you fly with aircraft, it just subconsciously gets put into your brain where, oh, this is the place that's going to create bad footage. This place is going to create good footage. So I tend to just avoid those off the bat. Or if I do have to fly into it, I just transition into it so that it doesn't ruin the shot, so it doesn't get too shaky. But overall, it's surprisingly handles very well.
That's awesome. I was it's interesting because you're talking about like some of that stuff's like you're talking about like should you get your private pilot certificate, like you're learning practically a lot of like aerodynamics 101. Like you're talking about like the wingtips and the wingtip vortices and stuff. Greg Hughes, our friend, says, how do you brief these flights with the aircraft pilots?
Yes, so the safety brief before the flight is probably the most important thing for any kind of footage that you want to get, and also it's very important to have direct communication with the pilot throughout the flight, because I need to know what the pilot is going to do, just because it helps me out a little bit in terms of safety. I could just chase him around in the sky and just kind of guess where he's going to go next, but it's always better to just know, okay, I'm going to take a left turn now. Great. And then I position myself, so I swing over to the right while he takes that left turn, because I find that creates really interesting footage because you get that movement in there, which I really like to film. But as far as the safety brief, it's how fast are you going to be going? How far are you going to be going? What maneuvers you're going to be doing. And typically when I shoot with these pilots, I tell them exactly what I want them to do. So oftentimes why it's so helpful to have that communication is because I would be leading them into, hey, can you take a right turn right here? Okay, perfect. Now hold that turn. All right, now level off and take a left turn. Could you slow down a little bit? Okay, now you can speed up. But everything has to be, of course, within the safety parameters of the pilot who's flying that aircraft. I'm just kind of on the outside. But yeah, very important. The other thing I like to cover with the safety briefs is what happens if something bad happens. So let's say I lose reception with the drone. What's going to happen then? Well, it happens if I lose video. And the way that these FPV drones are programmed, the way I set them up, is if I ever lose reception or anything bad happens, it's going to automatically trigger all the motors to stop spinning. So if you notice all the ways that I fly around these aircraft, I'm always going to be either behind it or under it. So if at any point, for whatever reason, the drone fails, especially when I'm flying around a helicopter, because that's more, there's more risk around the helicopter. If anything were to happen to the drone at that second, nothing would happen to the heli because I would just drop directly below it, under it. There's just no way that something bad would happen. And I also have a physical switch that I can disarm the drone at any point. So with those things in mind, that's part of the reason why FPV drones are the way to fly around aircraft. And I wouldn't trust, I mean, it depends on what pilot it is, but I wouldn't trust a Mavic or an Inspire as much flying around aircraft because they're not as maneuverable and they have all these pre-built, they basically fly themselves, safety mechanisms to where you can't just hit a switch and all the motors stop spinning and you lose the drone, right? And that's what's most important here, is not capturing the shot, but making sure that the pilot is safe, because the footage isn't worth it if something bad happens.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because all the times I've been most scared flying my like Mavic around on film sets is when the reception breaks, lose connection or whatever. And I've had it even happen really close to me, right? When you're talking about having like the visual observer, right? Like everyone sees what's happening where it is, and then it's just like, oh, I'm not listening to you anymore, and it does the like return to home function. And I've had it literally like the return to home functions, like I'm gonna go suicide into that building, and you're like, oh yeah, no, where'd it go? Like, and you can't do anything. You're just helpless. And luckily, in that case, whoever's watching, they would be upset by this. Like the sensors caught it, and it was just like, oh, I'm done, and it just hovered there by this building. But like, talk about, like for me, that felt riskier because it's like, oh, like I have no control now. It's just doing its own thing. It's gonna go take out someone's dog or something. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's like I was wondering about that, because if you had like a return to home function while you're chasing an airplane, the drone is not aware of where the airplane is necessarily, and then it's not safe. So it kind of, that's why I tend to turn it off when I'm flying, especially with helicopters. I always turn it off with helicopters because since they're flying slowly, I could be at any point around the helicopter at any time. I can be in front, I can be behind. So if the return to home function does start its thing and it flies into the blades, that's not a good idea at all. So I like to assume that at any second something bad could happen, and make sure that the drone, when something bad does happen, just cuts itself and just falls out of the sky. And I've only had to physically cut it off once, and it wasn't chasing an aircraft. It was actually chasing one of my buddies speed flying. And what happened was we both went into a dive, and the shot that I was trying to capture was he's going into a spiral dive, and I'm spinning exactly with him in tune. But he, inside the dive, he kind of hits the brakes. And so I start falling faster than him, so I have to avoid him, and then I don't see him. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I don't know where he's at. And right now, if he just spirals into my drone, I could cut up his wing, and that would be bad. So I'm just going to disarm. And of course, the moment I hit that switch and all my motors stopped turning, I see him out of the corner of my eye, and he's way past me, like way clear, totally safe. And I'm like, oh, shit. I just lost a drone. I tried to recover it, but it was, the altitude was too low. I'm like, all right, that's okay. And I would still make that same decision because, at the end of the day, safety is paramount. So I made that call, and I was happy with that call, even though the drone was ruined. So I'm trying to think of where I want to go next. I'm sure people have. Let me check the first questions here first. Oh, this is a good one actually. Plane Lady's wondering, do you ever get vertigo?
Oh, that's a great question. So since I'm on the grounds, when I'm on the grounds, no. I tend to not get vertigo just in general, but let's say I've had situations where I was flying out of the back of a moving vehicle, going downhill 50 miles an hour, doing turns on a mountain because we were chasing longboarders. And that was the only way for us to get reception from the top of the mountain to the bottom, is we're in the back of the car and we have those goggles on. Now that is really, it can be easy to get car sick in that situation because your body tells you one thing, but the drone is doing a completely different thing because you're about 100, 200 feet behind the longboarders. So you see them make a left turn, but you're still making a right turn because the road, there's a delay with the road because you're behind them. So in that situation, yeah, like if you do that the whole day, you start to feel a little queasy. But as far as just standing on the ground, no, I've never had a problem like that.
Kind of like a video game.
I mean, it's kind of like you're sitting in a theater almost, because once you put those goggles on, it kind of fills up this whole space in front of you. So it's maybe not a theater, but as though somebody just took a big TV and they just held it in front of you, and everything else you can't see. Everything else is just black. So it's hard to get vertigo unless you are in a moving vehicle yourself, because that messes up with your inner ear function. Because once you're starting moving your head around,
right?
Yeah, it doesn't match. Or if you kind of overthink it, and the only time I've seen this happen to people is happened to one of my friends who we were flying from the top of a building, a pretty high building, to where if you fell off, you would die. And sometimes to get the best reception, you need to be right alongside the edge. And if you stand up right next to the edge and you cover up your eyes with the goggles, some people get vertigo because their mind overthinks that, I'm about to fall off because I'm right next to the edge and I don't know like what's going on because my brain is seeing something completely different. So they overthink it, and then they do end up getting vertigo. But the way that I mitigate that, and I've never had that happen to me, but I just know that it's not comfortable flying off of the edge of a cliff standing. But sitting, I'm totally comfortable doing, and laying down as well is nice. So there's actually a shot of me in the last Panama trip that we did where we're on the top of a big skyscraper, and I needed to see below because with the reception of the goggles, like all the antennas are on the goggles and on the controller. So I needed to make sure that this was over the edge. Now, the only way to make sure that my goggles and my controller are over the edge is for me to lay down. So I asked the hotel or the residents there, hey, can you guys give me a pillow? Because there's this ledge, and then there's like a little bump right before there's a massive drop off. And it was cutting into my chest, and I couldn't just lay there. So I asked them for a pillow, and they supplied me with a pillow. So I'm just crawling out on the side, just laying with my hands over the top of the ledge. And I was still getting poor reception towards the bottom because there's just so many crazy signals down there. The building was pretty big, and there were some 5G towers down below. So all that stuff you have to keep in mind. You always have to see, okay, where am I flying? What can I see around me that has a possibility to transmit signals? Let's do a test flight to make sure that nothing bad happens. Let's see how far I can fly out and take a look at my RF meter to see how safe this is going to be. Can I fly out a mile or not? What is my range? So all of that stuff goes into it, and that's why there's a lot of stuff you need to know to be able to fly these FPV drones. And when I first started, I had no idea. I was never the technical kind of person. I was always the more creative kind. I was the guy with the film camera and everything. But technology and soldering things, I only learned within the past year because I just love the creative part of FPV drones so much that it kind of pushed me into that side of things.
I want to get into that in a second, the soldering and the assembling and all that stuff. But I have two kind of quick questions. So when we look at this stuff, by the way, great question, Playing Lady. Thank you for that one. You were talking about it's funny. You were like, this first one I did with the Carbon Cub, the drone only went 80 miles an hour. And I was thinking to myself, that's really fast. But what sort of, is it classified? What sort of speeds are you putting out now when you're flying?
Well, technically, as drone pilots, we're supposed to fly not faster than 99 miles an hour. So when I do these shoots, I often ask these guys, can you fly 99 miles an hour? Because that's kind of the sweet spot. But the top speed, theoretically, is probably a little closer to 125 miles an hour plus. depending on the conditions. But you got to keep in mind that for top speed, even if you were to hit that 125 mile an hour mark, once you can't hold it for very long because the battery just goes dead. But the higher you can get your initial top speed on any kind of drone design, the easier it's going to maintain something at 99 miles an hour. So the first drones that I flew, it wasn't even able to hit 99. But now the current design that I've been working with my designer, Zach Carzolis, that thing can hold 99 for a decent bit of time. So I'm able to capture these shots with that drone.
So now we've poked the hornet's nest a little bit. That's the wrong way to say it, but people are asking good follow-up questions. What's the weight then of like a drone that like 99 mile an hour drone?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but the drone that I use for most of the footage that you were sharing, it's actually not that big. I wish I had it with me, but it's in my van. It's about like this big, so it's not that heavy. That being said, the future and where I see everything heading is I've started to get a lot more serious into the cinema camera realm. And I think the GoPros are great and they're easy to work with and they have good stabilization capabilities because they have a really nice gyro built in. But imagine flying something like this behind a full-size aircraft. And now this is kind of next level stuff right here. And the reason I have this GoPro bolted on is I'm still using the gyro data off of the GoPro to stabilize the cinema footage coming out of this camera. And that is kind of where I've started to explore that side of things. And that the weight of those cameras, the weight of those drones is substantial compared to the ones that I've been flying.
I think I saw on your Instagram you're doing something with FreeFly's camera.
Yeah, the Wave right here.
Which I've never actually seen one held in someone's hand. That's tiny for what it does.
It's tiny, but it's actually a little heavy because it has a inbuilt battery. I think I'm not going to say what I think as far as weight goes because I'll probably be wrong. But so that I've been flying around helicopters, and you saw a little bit of the yak footage with that. But back when I filmed that, which wasn't that long ago, but still, the drone that I carried that with couldn't go very fast. It could only top out at about 50 to 60 miles an hour. I recently got this new drone, which I'm hoping I can push the 99 mile an hour mark with the Wave and some of these other cine gear. So I'm still testing it, but hopefully there will be some footage coming out soon with that.
And the reason the Wave is cool is because you can get this slow-mo footage that, if I'm cinema nerd moment for a moment here, like the only comparable thing that could do this before this was like a Phantom, and those are big.
Yeah, this FreeFly camera has been incredible. I wish I could share all the footage that I've captured with it, but a lot of the stuff that I've done with it, I'm still not able to share because I'm not allowed to release that footage yet.
No, that's okay. That's all right. Okay, so people are making jokes now that I don't know how to reference. Talk to me a little bit about like if I look at this and I'm like, man, like this is super cool. How do you get started? Like you mentioned, like your friend soldered up your first drone for you, and that's like a new skill for you is to like be assembling these things. Like what if it's me, like where do I start? Or the people at home, like where do we start to like learn how to do this? Because I will say every time I'm like I get like the bug, I'm like, oh, like FPV would be, I look at it as like I'm in a different phase of life than you, my friend. I'm like, oh man, like I'm a middle-aged dude with 2 kids. Like the time it takes to go to the airport to fly my plane is like too much. Like I can't necessarily go, but if I could like pop a battery on an FPV drone and like muck around for a little bit to blow off some steam, that would be really cool. So I get excited, and then I start like trying to consume all this information, and I get overwhelmed because I'm like, wow, there's like just so much. So how do you start?
So, I mean, I guess the first question would be, what do you want to accomplish with FPV drones? Because right now there's kind of three fields. There's the freestyle field, where you just go out and you do cool flippy floppy tricks, and you put your drones in places where, you know, you generally can't put with other drones. Then there's the cinema realm, and that's kind of where I am at. And then there's the racing realm, where you just go and set up gates and you race these drones. All of these, require kind of high performance drones. But I would say that the best way to get started and to figure out what you want to do is to just get a simulator and get a controller. So just get one of these controllers. It's like $250, maybe $300, and then download a simulator. And that's exactly how I started. When I asked my friend Carter to build me that first drone, I ordered that controller first, and I was like, I'm going to be ready when this drone is complete. And I put in like 60 hours, and for me it was very meditative because I was injured at the time and I had nothing better to do. So I would just plug my controller into the computer, put on some great music, and I would just spend hours and hours and hours, and it was great. It was really meditative for me. But it's a lot easier now. You don't need a best friend by the name of Carter to build you your drone, because now you can actually get them pre-built if you go on some of these websites like Get FPV, RDQ, Pyro Drone. They're going to be pre-built, but you still need to figure out how to fix them, because you're going to crash. It doesn't matter how many hours you put into that simulator. FPV drones are kind of made to crash. And that's why they're built out of carbon fiber, because when you have all of that crazy maneuverability and flying super low to the ground, especially if you're doing freestyle or racing, you tend to crash a lot with that. And the more you crash, the more you kind of start to figure out how to fix these drones. In the cinema realm, once you start flying some of these bigger drones, they're not meant to be crashed. So you already you need to get your skills up to that level. But before then, yeah, that's what I would recommend. Get a simulator, get a controller, fly around for a bit, and then purchase one of the pre-built drones that you can find on one of these websites, and then just go from there. Learn how to fix it once you crash it, and there's plenty of resources on YouTube. That's like the main bay of knowledge for FPV.
So take a moment to say that this move here is like brain bending to me. Like, I know this is with Guth Miller, right? Like,
Yep.
Like how the way that you guys timed like the retract and the like sideways. I don't know. Would you call it like a power loop? It's like a sideways power loop. Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about?
Not quite a power loop, but basically for that shot, what happens is when you're flying an FPV drone. Let me grab a good example here. All right, let's say we got this guy. This is like my practice drone, so it's all beat up and gross. But you have the camera angle, which is right here, and typically that's how fast you go. So when you want to go really fast, you adjust the camera angle like this, and so now you're tilted this way and you go faster. When you want to go slow, you tilt it low, and now to keep the horizon level, you go slower. So you go like this. When you're capturing that shot, what ends up happening is you're flying backwards like this, looking up. So you see how the camera angle is looking up now? And that way you can see below the aircraft. So for that shot with Matt Guthmiller, what I was doing is I started off from the top, and then I would slowly pivot myself sideways until I was directly flying backwards, looking up underneath the airplane. And then I would just tell the other Matt, who was standing right next to me, I'd say, hey, pull down your landing gear in 3, 2, 1, and then he'd do it, and then pull it back up in 3, 2, 1, and then he'd do it. And that was so much fun because, I grew up flying on Microsoft flight simulators and all kinds of simulators you can think of because I was always an aviation nerd. And being able to see something like that happening in real time from a similar perspective as you would see from a video game is just mind-boggling. I was having so much fun. I was just, that was a blast.
Yeah, it's super cool. And so I knew there had to be some sort of not trick, but like a technique to get it done. A lot of good questions coming in here. Canyon K is saying, as an old RC guy, what transmitter are you using?
I'm using a Tyrannus X9D Plus 2019 Access version.
That's
FR
not
Sky.
enough. That's a long. Here you go. It's a long name. There's a lot of things to remember.
Yeah, they have quite a few different models. So yeah, FR Sky Tyrannus X9D Plus Access 2019 version is what I fly. I also added some M9 Hall sensor gimbals recently that I've been enjoying quite a bit. So if you like that, you can add that too.
Another question. Rusty is wondering, so are you going to use an off-the-shelf drone for the cinema camera, or are you working on a design of your own, and will it also be gimbal mounted?
Oh, I see. Okay, so right now I have 2 cinema drones with the third one almost finished. And 2 of them I built myself. One of them is actually the first time I went out and I trusted, someone else to build a cinema drone for me. And these guys at Catalyst Machine Works, they have this drone. It's called the Money Shot Mini V2. I'll show it to you here in a second. This thing is pretty cool. So this one I didn't build myself. It's quite the process to be able to build and tune a drone like that. But yeah, what was the question again? I kind of forgot.
Oh, I
Did
think
answer that.
No, Rusty, if you have if you want to follow up on it, saying when you use, are you going to use an off-the-shelf drone for the cinema camera, or are you working on a design? Oh, I think he's just asking, like, I think you kind of answered it. Like, you've got like someone who helped you build that, but then he's also asking about, are you designing your own drones? And then maybe that's part 1, and part 2 is like, do you ever do gimbal mounted stuff on an FPV drone?
Gimbal mounted stuff on an FPV drone is starting to become a thing, especially in the cinema realm. You're starting to see people mount RS2 gimbals onto these larger cinema drones and then throwing in a camera as well. I'm not sure if that's the move for some of these high-speed shots that we're able to capture with aircraft, because at that point, I'm not sure if the gimbal would be able to sustain those speeds, or if the drone would be able to get to those speeds with the gimbal on top, because it needs to be as streamlined as possible to be able to fly it really fast, to be able to catch up with the plane, and to be able to fly with the plane for a good enough distance to be able to capture that shot. And when you add in a gimbal that needs to correct against the wind flow, because when you think about it, if you stick your hand out of a window of a moving vehicle at 80 miles an hour, that's quite a bit of force, and that is what your drone is experiencing. So it's definitely, I think, going to be something in the future, and I'm going to implement that. I just don't think that I want to see how fast I can go first before I start playing with those gimbals.
That makes sense. I know we were talking about free fly systems. Like, they have some gimbals now that are like for different, not for FPV flying style, right? But they've got some gimbals now that can handle like higher wind loads, and that seems to be like the challenge technically, right? Is like, okay, like literally if we want to like chase a car, chase a plane, whatever, the gimbal's got to be able to handle that aerodynamic force, and so they're like making shrouds and all that stuff.
And also like just keeping it streamlined, right? Because part of the challenge is to make sure that you can fly that drone for as long as possible at that speed. And when you have a gimbal on there, it's going to reduce the range and the speed. Well, I don't know if probably the speed too, but the range for sure, because you have just more stuff you need to carry on that drone. So since I'm able to control, I mean, FPV drones are so maneuverable, I can fly sideways, and basically the whole drone is my gimbal. So there are certain situations where, yes, there are certain shots that I have in mind where it'd be so nice to have a gimbal right next to that plane and I'm up in the air. But it's definitely something that's more down the road, because to be able to carry some of these drones to that speed with a gimbal, it needs to be heavy.
Sure.
It's going to need quite a bit of power. That thing is not going to fly on your, it's not going to fly on something like this for sure. This thing is tiny.
So before I wrap up for the night, so one was buy a transmitter, simulator, put some hours into that. What's the next step after that? Like you mentioned going to like buy like a pre-made thing and like learning it, physically trying it outside of the simulator. Like what's the kind of progression?
So next is you would go onto one of these FPV dedicated websites for FPV and order a bind and fly drone, and you can see there's different things you can order. There's so many different things. So this right here is just a regular old 5-inch Nazgul. This is something simple if you want to get into the freestyle realm or just get some practice with highly maneuverable drones. This would be great for that. If you want to get into more of the indoor flying, you'd want to get a bind and fly that's a little smaller, like a 3-inch. Something like, something like this. And this is a 3-inch, but all the props are covered. So it has a little sheath on there, so you can fly around indoors, and you can fly really close to people, and you can bounce off against whatever you want, and it's not going to hurt the drone or any people that you're going to be flying around. So that's another thing you can do. Or if you want to fly long range, you can get a drone that's a little bit bigger in size with bigger propellers, and you can go surfing mountains and get that cool visual experience if you live in a area that has interesting landscapes or terrain. But there's so many different, that's one of the reasons why I really love FPV. There's so many different ways that you can go, and so many different paths you can go once you get past the simulator and you start actually flying. You're like, well, I can get a micro drone, I can fly in between people's legs, I can do this, I can do that, I can get a more high performance drone, I can build something that's tailored to me. I can build a 360 drone, put a 360 camera in there, and you can't see the drone, so it's just 360 footage all around. Like, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about like your proximity flying to aircraft, but there's this whole other side of your career where you're doing the same thing but like really close to people, using that smaller drones. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. I don't have any footage to show, but something that's interesting to see is you've got the kind of these two extremes of like fast with big things high up in the air, and then like sneaking through. I think there was one where you're like sneaking under a model's leg or something, right? Like,
yeah. So I think, as a drone nerd, one of my missions is to kind of show the safety side of drones, and that they can cohabitat in the same place as people, and everybody can be safe if it's done correctly. And one of the ways that I think I try to do that is I have a sub 250 gram drone with its props covered, and it also has a GoPro on it, but it has a naked GoPro on it. So what that means is all of the unnecessary components are completely stripped out. It's just the lens and the gyro, and that's pretty much it. Just like a basic form for all of the tiny electronics that you need for it to work. And it's powered off of the same battery that the drone is running on. And with that drone, since it's so tiny and light, I can just take it and I can throw it at your face and nothing's going to happen to you. I can fly that in between people's legs, and that some of that model footage that you were talking about, I think it's a great kind of mix. When I went over to Miami and I spent some time there, the whole fashion scene and the model scene, it's a great mix to kind of showcase that, because you have a lot of bare skin and this little drone, and when you think about it in your mind, you're like, skin and drone, that doesn't seem like a good combination, but you can make it work really well and really safely to be able to capture footage that is not possible any other way. Because at that point, it's just a little camera that you can take anywhere you want. You can fly it up to the ceiling. You can fly up, next to somebody's heels, in between legs, and it's all seamless and smooth, and it's just a complete one shot. So just think about the creative aspects of it and what you can accomplish. You can connect two different areas. You can connect two different airspaces. You can go outside, fly around, dive a building, fly inside a building, fly in between models' legs, do some orbits around somebody on stage, and it's all within 30 seconds. Like, how else can you do that? That's incredible.
It's a super powerful storytelling tool, right? Like,
absolutely.
And we talk about, like, one of my favorite things in film school was like the idea of a long take, because it helps mess with the audience's suspension of disbelief in terms of the movie being real. So like, Clockwork Orange, go real deep, real film nerd. Clockwork Orange has some great scenes like that, but like Children of Men, maybe these are all movies that you've never seen because you're far younger than I am. But like these famous long take movies, right? Like that same thing applies with the drone shot like that, because you're able to tell the story uncut in a way that connects, and there's a little bit of magic, right? I think was the one like a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer. It was like a bowling alley or something in Minnesota. Went viral because it was like one of the first ones where it was like outside, it's inside, it's following the ball, it's behind the rack or whatever. So that's a really 100%. really cool storytelling thing. I want to just check for any other questions here before we wrap up for the night. Is there, I guess, let's talk about this real quick. Like, is this something you do? This is like your career. So like, how should people, if people want to find you or learn more about you or hire you, like what's the best way to do that?
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm just Nico Films with a Z on all platforms. So that's NIKOFILMZ. So Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, you can find me on there. And then, yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. But as far as the career side of things, I actually just started going full-time with drones fairly recently. So end of January. So it's only been like 2-3 months since I went in full-time. But before then, I just kind of, it was really hard for me to balance like the drone side of things and the job that I had. So I just had to go full-time because I want to see how far I can take this.
Dude, you got to do it. You got to do it. I talked about this on the show, like I'm a producer, and one of the saddest things for me is when people are really passionate about something. We just had this happen recently, like up and coming production assistant. She's getting all this work, but it's not quite enough work, and she's got to balance it against her, like post-college job. And we're like, my partner and I are like trying to get her out in more film shoots so she can like pursue this dream of film. And then she had to call it. She's like, no, I got to go like work at a bank because I can't, pay rent. And I'm like, no, just move out of the apartment. Stay after the dream. You're going to be able to do it. So I think that's cool, man. Yeah, you got to do it. Couple things, and then we got to play a game, and then we're going to wrap it up for the night. Real quick, local host says, love having this on. I've sensed some tension between pilots and drone operators and hope to see more opportunities for both worlds to learn from each other. It's kind of cool.
100%.
Before we wrap up, we always play a game. Are you up for a quick game before we wrap it up for the night? I have to change some of the questions.
Are they too aviation specific? Do you think I won't understand it?
No, you're aviation, dude. You're a pilot. I'll call it like you're a pilot. I do hope you go get your
I will
private pilot. You got to do it.
I couldn't live with myself if I don't have a private pilot's license. I just need to get my drone career up to a point where, I'm happy with it, and then at that point I'm like, all right, we're sending it full pilot's license. Here we go. So I'm holding
For
out
sure.
for a little bit.
So there's just like one everyone wants me to ask you. Hang on. Well, before we start, I normally ask the pilots, the full scale pilots, let's say, like if they fly with north up or track up on the GPS. It's probably not a thing for you. So I won't ask that question. You can't answer that. Sorry, guys. They're all like, "What is it going to be, north up or track up?" But that doesn't apply here. But there are other questions. So let's get this thing. It's called Short Final. Short Final with Nico Films tonight. We got a minute on the clock. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. You're going to answer whatever comes to the mind. And Greg, okay, I'll ask it. He's saying he's giving me replacement questions here. No wrong answers, no right answers. Just whatever you decide. There's no points or all the points. Whatever. It's like that old show with Drew Carey. All right, here we go.
Let's do it.
I think I figured this out. Clock. Oh wait. Music first, then clock. Let me reset it. It's not fair. All right, here we go. Nico, it's time for Short Final. First thing for Greg Hughes wants to know, Clockwork Orange or Children of Men?
Children of Men.
Lost Localhost has a great one too. Digital or analog?
That's a good one, but digital.
Okay, what about the craziest place you've ever flown a drone?
Craziest place. That one's hard. But I'll say I really like South Beach in Miami. That place is cool.
That sounds awesome.
That I wish I could share, but I can't yet.
Oh, gotcha. What about if this is a question from one of your friends earlier? If like everything was legal for a day, what would you want to film with?
I would chase a jet off of an aircraft carrier.
You didn't have to let me. You're like, I already know. I'm gonna do that.
Top Gun, here we go. Give me that
F-18. That would be super, super dope. Dude, Nico, this has been so fun to learn. And it's funny, every week, everyone's like, whatever's on the show, Ryan wants to research and buy. So, so maybe finally after talking to you, I will finally get into doing that. But instead of me learning how to do it for work, I'm just going to learn how to do it for fun, and then I'll just call and hire you for work.
I mean, you can do it both ways. There's so many different niches inside the FPV world. I just happen to choose planes as one of them.
Well, it's no South Beach, but we'll get a job and we'll fly out to fabulous Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you can do.
I'm probably gonna go to Oshkosh this year.
Well, then we gotta meet up, dude.
Yeah, because I was at Sun and Fun, but we didn't get to meet.
Oh, dude, that I know. I think that's why Kelly and I were talking about. Yeah, I'm bummed we didn't know each other yet, but yeah, we'll definitely. They're arguing about whether or not you would be north up or track up in the chat. By the way, they're predicting. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have you back. You're gonna go. Make $1 bajillion. You actually don't need $1 bajillion to learn how to fly. But you're going to go make $1 bajillion because your work is awesome. And then you're going to come back on the show when you're like flying like your G6 or whatever. And you're going to be able to tell us if you prefer north up or track up.
Deal.
Well, Greg is saying north up? Yeah.
It's probably going to be north up. Just sounds right to me.
That's kind of how I work. I've been switching over to track up because people make me feel bad about being north up. Anyway, that's a whole separate conversation.
In the goggles, I have my own heads-up display, right? But there isn't a compass, so you can't really say north up or wherever. It just shows an arrow to where I launched from. So does that count as track up, or what does that count as? Is that completely different?
No, so the way it is kind of different. So basically what it is like when you look at the GPS, you can pick either like a map and then you turn like the representation of the plane turns whatever direction, but the map stays constant. Or track up is the plane stays constant and the map moves around it. So
I would want track up then. Because then I don't know, I feel like it'd be easier to adjust to the terrain in that sense.
Well, and the reason why track up, I think, makes more sense in most people's brains is when you look at the map, if it's on the left, it's actually on the left. Whereas if you're north up, your brain has to like recalculate which part of, like which direction something is on the map compared to where you're moving.
Yeah, and with FPV drones, since it's so quick, the turns are ridiculously fast. You kind of just need to know where the terrain is because you're just flying alongside it, right next to it.
Greg says he'll know after he flies with me, and then he says, no, not north up, track up, really. Awesome. Well, dude, Nico, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. This has been a lot of fun to learn about FPV drones and all the cool, amazing cinema stuff. I'm serious, like, AvGeek or not, like, go check out Nico's stuff on Instagram. It's going to blow your mind. Like, if you thought the little clips that we were showing today were amazing, there's even more amazing stuff on his Instagram account. Also, before we wrap up, I got to say thank you. Thank you to all the Patreon supporters who support this channel. You guys keep me going every week. Even when I'm having a rough week, it's like, man, I can't wait for SuperAero Live. We will do a Zoom after show. I just got to send it out to you supporters. So Patreon supporters, hang tight. I'll send you a Zoom link in just a few minutes once we wrap up. Nico, dude, thank you again. I don't know where you are. You're somewhere in the world, but I hope you are having an awesome adventure, and I can't wait to see what you do next, man.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. I'm always stoked to have an opportunity to share a bit more about the FPV world and spread the FPV gospel.
I love it. Awesome, dude. All right, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you next week. Fly safe. We'll see you later, Sky fam.
Thanks, everyone.